Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. Welcome to Understanding the Empowerment Scholarship Accounts. Thank you all for being here today. Today's webinar is completely full, so we know this is really an important topic. There's been a lot of buzz about it and a lot of questions that have come our way, so we thought that maybe we would take a stab at educating some people. My name is Melissa Van Hook. I am the co-chair of the Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, or ADDPC for short, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Go ahead. Thank you for that. We have some great speakers lined up for you today. Karla Escobar, the director of Arizona's Empowerment Scholarship Program, will be speaking, followed by Maya Abella, a staff attorney for the Arizona Center for Disability Law, and Kathy Gray-Mangerson, a family support specialist with Raising Special Kids. Over the next hour, we will be sharing information to help you determine if ESAs are appropriate and a good fit right for you. At the end of each person's presentation, there will be time for questions and answers at the very end of this webinar. So hold your questions until the very end, please. But let me start off with why we are doing this. So this is my son, Dane Van Hook. He is 15 and he's a sophomore on an empowerment scholarship account. My son went through public school all the way up through the end of 6th grade. And while we had a reasonably good experience, my son had some serious challenges. He has autism, and he's also twice exceptional. He's very, very gifted, but the autism presents challenges with that. And at the end of 6th grade, he was dealing with a number of health issues as well. He missed, on average, 31 days of school a year due to his health complications. Maintained straight A's, but going into junior high school, I was very concerned about trying to deal with 6 different teachers and so many classrooms on a number of issues. I was concerned about how his health would be addressed if he missed any time in school, what would happen. And the giftedness was really not being addressed at all. He was not challenged. And his autism, there were some things that came up that at the secondary level in junior high, there really wasn't the supports in place that my son needed. So we chose to go on an empowerment scholarship account. And the first semester home, I used some tutors and did some homeschooling with him and recognized pretty quickly that that's not my forte and he needed a lot more challenges than that. So I did my homework and sought out a private school. He's at Brightmont Academy, and it's been an amazing fit for him because they can accommodate his disability, his autism, and they challenge him tremendously. My experience has been positive. I have every intention of keeping my son on his empowerment scholarship account all the way through his graduation. I have a wonderful team that's working with him. He's developed personal relationships and made friends, and he's really flourishing, and his health is much better under the condition we're in with his schooling. I have met a lot of parents along the way that have not had such positive experiences, and I think it's because there has been a lack of information available. I wasn't even aware of some of the things that we give up as parents when we accept an empowerment scholarship account. I wasn't aware of the rights that we give up, or that private schools really aren't overseen by anybody, and that there aren't a lot of rules that apply. And parents that I encountered when they were in placements, particularly in private schools, that they had challenges and the curriculum wasn't what it was promised, or there were serious issues with restraint and seclusion, those parents really discovered that they didn't have options. So we're going to talk more about that today, the pros and the cons of what you need excuse me. So what we will learn about today is when ESAs work, common questions about ESAs, the trade-offs of using ESAs, that would be the rough points, and then what you can do if an ESA is not necessarily right for you. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Karla, the Director for Empowerment Scholarship Account with ADE.
You're gonna have to unmute.
Can you guys hear me now? Perfect. So my name is Karla Escobar.
Yep,
I was the former director with the Empowerment Scholarship Account. So 3 years later, I am back. I am grateful for this opportunity to kind of bring this program back to life and bring it back to where it once used to be. So we'll get right started with the Empowerment Scholarship accounts. As you know, these accounts are established to provide a quality education for our students here in Arizona, and we have basically a law that governs over the Empowerment Scholarship accounts. These are state funds that are typically would go to your district or your charter school, and now we're taking those funds and we're allocating it to the parents to educate their kids as they seem fit. These are not federal funds or local funds, so we're strictly talking about the state funds here. And the grades that we target are preschool kids, particularly kiddos with disabilities, and kindergarten through 12th grade. So people always ask, what is funding based on? And one of the things that we always say is that, everything has to do with the public school district or the charter school that the child is attending, the grade level that they're in, and the primary eligibility if you have a kiddo with disabilities. So here's kind of a little chart of how it works when we're talking about monies coming over from the Department of Education if they were going into a public school versus coming to the parent and what the choices are to do with it, okay? We also have a funding chart. It was asked of me to produce one of these, so it's finally back out again, and here you can see the various categories and the estimated amounts. Now these are estimated amounts. We know that some kiddos will get a little bit more, but it will never be less than what the amounts are. So what does accepting an ESA mean? So as many of you know, if you're on the Empowerment Scholarship account, it's new responsibilities. It's homework. You become the school, you become the liaison between the agencies and the Department of Education. You become that teacher, that administrator, that accountant. You also become the person that's transporting your kid back and forth. And we're talking about how does your child qualify here for an ESA. So basically one of the first things is that they have to meet the first 100 days in public school. If they're a kid with a disability or if they're a child of a ward of the courts, they could have an STO for displaced or disabled students the year prior to applying. If you're eligible for kindergarten, then you don't have to meet the first 100 days. So these are some of the categories that kiddos can fall under, but since we're primarily here speaking about kiddos with disabilities, we'll concentrate on a child with a disability. So in order for you to be qualified as a child with a disability, you have to have an IEP or an evaluation, which is your MET report from the public school, and that has to be provided to us. We don't require the entire document. We're looking for the pages that would give us the category because that's what we're funding out of, and then the information page that basically tells us your child's name, the school that they're coming out of, and the grade level. So here's a couple of questions regarding the 100-day rule that we see a lot of confusion. So there is a 10-day gap that kiddos can miss out in school. So when we're talking about the first 100 days, we basically say, what if my child enrolls late and starts school right after it's begun? So what we're looking at is that they don't have to be there on day 1. You can gap the first 100 days. So if a child starts on day 9, eligible to stay on the program as long as within those 100 days they haven't gapped these 10 or more days. If they start on day 11, that's when we run into problems and the child would become not eligible for the program under the 100-day rule. We get questions about my child is sick or he misses school often or there's a gap between, pulling my kid out of one particular school into another school. Once again, as long as you're not gapping those 10 or more days, then everything looks good for enrollment purposes for the ESA program. Our applications now, and this is new to me, is year-round applications. I think our deadline for applications for the 18-19 school year ended on March 1st, and so we're now taking applications for the 2019-2020 school year. And this is the website that you could find your applications on, and the requirements are all there. You can also still continue to send your application via email or by mail, although we prefer that you get familiar with our portal and apply through the portal. And once your application is approved, we do send you an acceptance letter that basically lets you know what the award amount is. After that award letter has been given out to you, which we have a 45-day period from the time that your application is complete. That means that there are no missing documents. No one has gone back to say we're missing this. Once we get those documents in to consider your application a complete application is when day one starts rolling for us. Once you've been awarded the contract packet, you're going to receive a contract, you're going to receive a handbook, and you're going to receive a handbook attestation, which you will fill out the attestation and the contract and send it back to us. Once that's all in place, we're going to start getting everything ready to get your prepaid debit card, and that will be the next step that will come to you after we've received contract and the attestation. If you are denied, we do send you out a denial letter with the reason for denial, and if you ever feel that this is incorrect, we really encourage you to reach out to us so that we could attempt to fix the problems or figure out what happened to cause the denial. And here's just a few things of what not to do on an application. We don't want you to submit additional documents. We collect enough documents as it is. So one of the biggest things is that we don't supplement anything other than the IEP and the evaluation. So we can't take a medical diagnosis, and we can't take any private evaluators or private school evaluations or anything like that. It has got to be strictly from your school district or your charter school. We also say take a look at the proof of residency list, as they are requiring for you to provide proof of residency. Don't send anything else except what is required, one of those documents that's on the list, okay? Another thing that we also urge you to do is to check your evaluations, check your IEPs. For our purposes for this 1920 school year, they are considered expired on July 1st, 2020, because we start on July 1st of 2019 and we fund all the way through June 30th of 2020. So that's considered the contract year for us. Evaluations they're 3 years. Here's the great thing about it, that once you've submitted an evaluation, which is your MET report, you are never going to need to submit one to us. So we always urge parents to submit that evaluation report to us, because if you submit the IEP, we're going to come knocking at your door asking for that evaluation. And another great thing is that you never lose your right to an evaluation. So here's some drawbacks that Melissa was talking about. Once you're on the program, you do lose your right to a free and appropriate public education, which is FAPE. You're no longer eligible for an IEP, but you can receive your evaluation every 3 years as needed. And these are just some reasons that a school can decline to reevaluate. The important part is that they have to issue that prior written notice, the PWN, stating the reason to evaluate. So you're no longer eligible to receive public school services unless you're going to pay for those services. And keep in mind that schools are not obligated to provide these services. So just like a private school can deny entrance, a public school, once you came out of the public school and onto an ESA, can decline to provide these kind of services that they may have on their campuses, okay? Just a few things about the applicant parent. Once you start as the applicant parent, you stay as the applicant parent. That means that you sign the contract, the bank forms are in your name, the bank card is in your name. If you need to change parents, we urge you that that needs to happen the following year. So keep it consistent, think about who's going to be the applicant parent, and keep it that way. So here's a few things of what you can spend your monies on. So an array of lists from private school tuition to therapies and paraprofessionals, and this is only for kiddos with disabilities, the paraprofessionals and the educational therapies. The life skills, we have curriculums that have to include reading, grammar, math, and science at a minimum. We have fees for managing the account, uniforms, and whatnot. Here's a few things of what you can't spend your funds on. Lunches and transportation, sports equipment, musical instruments, field trips. These are some of the other things, medical services, so we have to be careful not to cross that educational and medical line. Co-pays, we've seen yoga, so 529 plans are out of the question. I think they've switched them over to Coverdale plans. Here's a big caution that we tell our families, particularly when they're looking for private schools, is that keep in mind that there is nothing out there, like Melissa says, that governs over them. So they are not required to have certified teachers. They're not required to have special education teachers. They're not required to have any kind of certified provider or any other person that's going to provide these supports for our students. They're not even obligated to provide special education services to a child. Keep in mind that they can remove your student at any time for any reason. They don't have to, follow the same rules that the public school have to follow. And some of them, from what I'm hearing, are even doing online curriculums and calling that special education. So they basically have a child just sitting on the computer, clicking the button, and there's no one-on-one with the student anymore the way some of the public schools would work with them. So another thing that we always caution parents too is, some private schools always want to know what your scholarship is, what the amount looks like, and that is completely up to you whether you want to provide that information. And if you are providing that type of information, these are some of the questions that we would love for you to ask. I know that if I was in a parent's shoes, I would ask, what do special education services look like? Do you have certified teachers and providers? What curriculum are you using? And what does the day look like for my child from the minute that he walks into the school to the time that he gets picked up from school? Keep in mind that if you are attending a school that is considered privately day placed and approved private day placement by the Department of Education, they will have these certified teachers on board. They have to in order to get that privately day placement. This is just some of our scheduling. We've now switched it over to go as far as the end. We used to stop it on the 20th, but that was just cushion because I needed that when I was doing everything manually. Now with the system, this is allowing. So these are just some of the dates to keep in mind. And then a child remains on the program until they're in the 12th grade. We move them over in a cohort, so your funds keep rolling over. And what we mean by a cohort is if they start in the 4th grade, they continue 5th, 6th, and 7th. If you have a kiddo with a disability, in order for you to get your 5th year or your 6th year, you have to prove to us that they would need the additional years. And this is when we would ask you to tap into your public school system and have them either write us a letter or reevaluate that your son or daughter would continue without a doubt for another year on the program. And this is all information. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. I hope that this was useful. We are going to be going out and doing more trainings and more meetings like I used to many years ago, so be on the lookout for those. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Maya Bell. I'm going to go ahead and take over the next part of the presentation. I'm a staff attorney at the Arizona Center for Disability Law. I practice in some of our special education cases, and Karla had a sort of a nice overview, preview of some of the things, the drawbacks and cautions concerning what happens to your child's rights to special education after you accept an ESA. And I'm going to delve a little bit further into those in this part of the presentation. So there's basically 2 points that I'd like to make sure that folks understand as a takeaway to this part of the presentation, and that is that legal rights of your student to the special education services and protections that you might be used to if they've been in the public school system, they fundamentally change when you voluntarily withdraw them from public education and accept the ESA. And also, secondly, this is going to be a really broad overview. These situations lead to a lot of nooks and crannies in the law that I'm not going to get a chance to cover every aspect of it, but I just want to kind of give you the overview and things to think about if you're evaluating whether to utilize an ESA for your child. The other thing I will say sort of as a general note is that in my own research on this topic, you notice that states around the country have their own particular voucher programs, scholarship programs, school choice programs. They're all different, and they're all going to be different in terms of the consequences for what rights are retained or given up when you participate in that type of a program. So just really be aware that if you do your own research, be looking into things that are specific to Arizona's program. So one thing to keep in mind is that there is a part of the Arizona Revised Statute, so that's state law that pertains to the ESA program. It's cited here on the slide for your reference if you want to Google it at some point. The part for today's conversation that's really the most important to know is that upon accepting an ESA, a parent is required to release the school district from their obligations to educate the child. And that's a pretty sweeping release, and there's really only one exception to it, and that is that the public or the charter district where the child was previously enrolled is still required to provide them evaluations and reevaluations. And so this is a really big deal when it comes to the special education rights of your child. And it in hand with that release of rights that the parent agrees to when they sign the ESA contract, there is the fact that special education laws, particularly IDEA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, these are laws that apply to public schools and charter schools. They do not apply to private schools. And as you'll notice here, the kind of core concepts of the IDEA, the FAPE, free appropriate public education. Public is highlighted here because it is required that it's being taking place in the public school system. It does not apply to private schools. And it's very unlikely that Section 504 would apply to a private school in the sort of elementary and primary and secondary setting. Technically, 504 will apply to a school if it receives federal funding, but as I said, that's very unlikely to be the case. Moving forward here, I just wanted to kind of create this visual for this whole host of terms and rights and concepts that come up when you talk about special education of children with disabilities. And really, what's really critical to understand is these are stemming from the IDEA. So if the IDEA does not apply, those rights are also not going to be available. And getting into what this means for your child specifically, you know, that, like I mentioned earlier, the right to a FAPE in the least restrictive environment, that core concept of the IDEA is simply not required in private schools, and your child will not have a right to FAPE in a private school. Also, if there's no right to a FAPE and all of those things with the IDEA, there's no right to the IEP or Section 504 plan itself. Arizona's ESA program applies to both children who are under an IEP and also have a Section 504 plan. However, neither of those are going to apply in a private school. So they are not going to have a right to individualized instruction. There's going to be no right to related services, so things such as therapy, specialized transportation. If you have a student that is 16 and above and they're looking into transition-aged services, there's also no right to transition services in a private school. So these are all things just to consider and think about as you're evaluating whether an ESA might be right for your child. And then also, along with no IEP, you're not going to have annual IEP meetings or IEP goals or progress reports. So again, those structures that exist to ensure that a child's progress can be measured and developed and evaluated on an annual basis is simply not going to be there in a private setting. Another really critical part of the rights that are given up when you accept an ESA is that the procedural safeguards under IDEA, things like prior written notice for changes that a school might make to the education program for your child, due process and state complaint procedures if a dispute arises about educational services, those are all gone. Now I have little asterisks here, and that's just because there is only one thing that remains after you accept an ESA in terms of a public district's obligations to your student, and that is the right to evaluate, or the requirement that they evaluate. And so that is something that might remain open. However, by and large, that is going to be procedural safeguards that are foreclosed once you accept an ESA. And then sort of further too is that there is no right to discipline safeguards. If you have a student with a disability who has challenging behaviors as a result of a disability that lead to disciplinary issues, you know, the disciplinary protections in the IDEA are not going to apply. So, you know, there's no manifestation determinations or any other kind of services that are going to help your child if they're experiencing discipline-related disability issues. Moving forward, kind of a few other things. As Karla mentioned too, you know, there's very little in the state of Arizona that regulates private schools. You know, there's not a requirement to have certified or even high qualified special education teachers. There's extremely limited guarantees about curriculum, basically just baseline that, you know, they have to be instructing in reading, math, grammar, that sort of thing. And again, no requirement that a private school is going to participate in state testing or other student evaluation services. And this can be really critical for parents who you know, want to know how their child is progressing, whether they're making progress that's appropriate. And that's something that's really just pretty unregulated here in the private realm. And then again, as I mentioned, the access to dispute resolution procedures is really going to be extremely limited if you're in the ESA program. You know, the ADE state complaint procedure, mediation, and due process is really only going to be available if you're talking about the evaluation issue that I mentioned earlier, and not for any other dispute about your child's educational services. And then again, also there's likely no complaint procedure related to Section 504. That's the OCR, is the Office of Civil Rights for the Department of Education at the federal level. And they investigate complaints related to violations of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. But again, the school would have to receive federal funding in order for them to be able to evaluate a complaint. And that's unlikely to exist in the elementary and secondary private school contexts. Let me check my time here. I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to past that slide. I can get to it if there are questions that relate to it, but I did want to spend a little bit of time focusing on the legal rights and remedies that a parent has if there are things that arise after they've withdrawn their child and have accepted an ESA. The first one, and it might seem obvious, but in certain states they do preclude this. So I just wanted to point out that in Arizona there is nothing that says you can't file an administrative complaint with either OCR or the Department of Education for violations that occurred back when the student was enrolled in the public charter district. And again, because those are previous violations, they do apply concerning what the conduct of the public school. But those are things that to be aware of. Your remedies might be more limited because the child's no longer enrolled. However, be aware that that is possible if that's something you would like to consider pursuing. Again, many parents turn to the ESA program after there have been disputes with a school district, so this is likely scenario. The other thing to keep in mind is that you still, like I mentioned earlier, have the rights regarding evaluation and reevaluation. And then also, Arizona's Restraint and Seclusion law does extend to private schools, and that is something it could be more robust, I should say, but it does have some requirements in terms of the programs and procedures and notification responses that schools are kind of required to put in place to notify parents of when a restraint and seclusion incident has occurred. And then there are other rights that exist sort of in law generally that I don't practice in that area, so I'm not going to speak to the details of that, but you know, things regarding tort law, you know, negligent supervision, for example, comes up sometimes in the school context. That those would apply, you know, in a private context, a private school, as they do in a public realm. So that's also something to consider. The final thing I wanted to point out too is that in terms of the legal rights and remedies available, Title III of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, does apply specifically to private nursery, elementary, and secondary schools. So even though ADA rights are different from special education rights. Special education rights are much more detailed, require a lot more in the public school realm. However, I did want to point out that there are still rights under the ADA that you can evaluate in terms of whether the private school is providing an appropriate reasonable accommodation or auxiliary aids and services for a student with a disability that's enrolled there. And if that's a problem, there are complaint procedures. If you wish to file a complaint with Department of Justice under Title III, it's possible and even likely in some circumstances that it would get referred to the Department of Education, OCR, for evaluation and investigation, but those resources in terms of your administrative complaints are on the ESA handout that is available as a file for download or a PDF, and that should be available for everyone. Sorry, I was just trying to figure out where it was listed. But that's it for now. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kathy from Raising Special Kids for the next part of the presentation.
Thanks, Maya. I am Kathy Gray-Mangerson with Raising Special Kids, and I am going to talk to you about, if you don't choose ESA, what are some things that you can do in your child's current situation or other types of options that might be available for you. So the first thing I want to talk about is collaboration. The IEP team should be working together to collaborate, to figure out what is in the best interest of that child. There is no I in team. So the whole team, parents and everybody in the school should be working together to do exactly what the child needs. And I want you to think about your own IEP team. You might have been considering ESA because things are not working right with your team and it's not as collaborative as it could be. What could you do to model collaboration with the team so that it could be more collaborative in the future? And parents' expertise on their child is a mile deep and an inch wide. They are the experts on their child. They know strengths and weaknesses and likes and dislikes and what's worked and what hasn't worked. And that's important information to share with the team because the school's responsibility and the school's expertise on the child is it is an inch deep and a mile wide. They know children like your child. They know what strategies and techniques have worked with children with the same disabilities. And so having both of those viewpoints in the IEP meeting and part of the team is going to ensure that we do the best together to make sure that the child is successful in the community environment. Also, oftentimes schools don't know about community services and programs that are available. That would be just as helpful to parents. And many schools refer parents to Raising Special Kids, and if you'd like to know about eligibility for Division of Developmental Disabilities, Arizona Long-Term Care, Behavioral Health, Social Security, any of those things, you are more than welcome to call us and we'll be happy to help you understand those types of things. You heard Karla and Maya talk a little bit about what's included in the Individuals with Disabilities Act, and I'm going to take that even a little bit further and talk about that collaboration as far as the IEP team is concerned is part of the law. And we really do need to be working together to make sure that the child succeeds and that the school needs to let the parent know if there's anything unusual going on and vice versa. And one of the things that you might be able to do that might help with this process is, if appropriate, allow your child to attend the IEP meeting for the first 5 minutes or so, just so that everybody in the room remembers that this is a living being, human being. It's not just their name on a piece of paper, and what we are deciding is going to affect their future and the success of who they are and their education. Many parents call me and they say, I'd like to know my rights, and I'm happy to tell them their rights, but I also share with them that they have responsibility. There are things that they need to know and do. So yes, they're an equal member of the team, but they have to participate as an equal member of that team, meaning they have to let the team know their concerns, they have to ask questions during the meeting, that type of thing. A parent can also request that an IEP be revised at any time. They can hold it in a meeting, or we can amend an IEP without meeting. It's all whatever is best for the team. Also, the parent is allowed to receive a copy of the child's IEP, MET report, anything along those lines. And the best advice that I could give you is please read every word of the IEP, because the services and supports listed in that IEP have to be provided to that student. Once you know what's in the IEP, then you can go about asking questions about those services. Now, every time I talk to a parent on the phone, they say to me, gee, I don't know the IEP as well as I should. Well, one of the services that Raising Special Kids provides is that we can set up a one-on-one consultation with you. You can send any of us your IEP, and then we'll set up a date and a time, and we'll go together over the IEP, every word, every page, so you really understand what's in it, help you get some of your questions answered or pose some of your questions to the team. And also, parents need to communicate regularly with the school staff. And there can be all kinds of methods for that. So I would highly recommend that you get together with all of your child's teachers, and maybe this one wants you to text them, this one wants you to call, this one wants you to email, this one would rather do something in the backpack. Doesn't matter what the method is, but please communicate regularly with them so they know what your concerns are and you know what their concerns are. And one of the most important things is there's a lot of paperwork in special ed. So please get yourself organized, keep the paperwork together, make sure that you have a copy of every evaluation done for your child, every IEP, prior written notice, any and all of those types of things are in some kind of organized method so you can access them at any time. Also monitor things. So first of all, goals in the IEP last for 12 months, and every 3 months you will get a progress report. So find out from the school or charter how they do that. Some of them send them in the mail, some of them put them in the backpack. How does that work? And when those progress reports come in, read those. And just as a baseline or a guideline, about the first 3 months after the goal has been set, the child should be at about 25% of the goal. After 6 months, the child should be at about 50% of the goal. After 9 months, the child should be at about 75% of the goal. And after a year, that goal should be completed. Homework, make sure that the child's getting homework, that they're doing the homework, turning it in, and they actually understand it. Find out how they did on any district assessments that are coming out. And if you need daily communication with a school, either you've got some behavioral issues, academic issues, whatever, then create some kind of communication log that goes in the backpack. You look at it, make comments, school looks at it, they make comments, and back and forth, back and forth. Also, if behavior is suddenly becoming worse and worse, you might want to ask the school for a functional behavioral assessment and a behavior intervention plan. But oftentimes there's a lack of progress. So what happens? Well, you certainly can call an IEP meeting if you want to, but we always recommend chain of command, informal chain of command. Start at the bottom and work your way up. So if you're getting those progress reports and the child's not making progress, the first person I would go to is the person responsible for that goal. Whether it's the teacher or the speech therapist or the occupational therapist, physical therapist, I would ask, what's happening? Is the IEP not being implemented? Do we need to change the goal? Is there anything else going on? A couple of other things that might be helpful to you that we offer is we have a webinar online called 10 Things You Need to Know Before Your Next IEP Meeting. That might be helpful to you. Also, all over the state, we offer a 2-hour free workshop on IEPs. Really, our job is to help you learn the law, learn the protections within the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And we do that any number of ways. But find out what's going on. And do you need to have an IEP meeting? Maybe you do. And if you do, then certainly you can call that at any time. And let's say you decide to have that meeting. What are some of the things that you could do to be prepared for it? So before the meeting, You can send your concerns to the district or the charter to include in the IEP. You can also ask for a draft of the IEP, which would be ideal, because you could sit down with the current IEP and the draft, compare them, make a list of your questions and concerns, maybe come down to your top 3 things that you want to talk about. And then during the meeting, please focus on collaboration. And one of the ways that you can do that by asking open-ended questions are to ask who, what, when, where, and how questions. You don't ask why questions because that causes people to defend their position. But who is going to do that intervention? What do you think it might look like? Where's it going to take place? When could I anticipate a report on that? That might help you form that collaboration, get your questions answered, and not be a confrontational meeting. And then after the meeting, do not hesitate to write an email or a letter summarizing everything that happened at the meeting and what you're looking forward to in the future. And last but not least, Maya told you that none of these exist under ESA, but if your child is still in a public school of some sort, then you have these options. And we always recommend that you start with the informal options of talking to the teacher and moving your way up, but sometimes you need to do formal dispute resolution options, and you have 3 of them in no particular order. Mediation is the least adversarial. It's also, unfortunately, the least used, but basically you contact the Arizona Department of Education, say you'd like to mediate with your school. They then contact your school, and it's a voluntary process. So if the school says, no, we do not want to mediate with the parent, then the process is over. If they say, yes, we're happy to mediate, then it's turned over to a third-party impartial mediator who will then handle the session. Also, if you feel that they violated anything in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, you can file a state complaint with that. It takes them 60 days to evaluate, and then if they find that the school was out of compliance, then they'll create a corrective action plan. And then due process, you might think of that like court, where there are attorneys on both sides, there are expert witnesses, it's win-lose, very costly, takes a lot of time. So those are all your options, and at this point you want to keep your child in a public school, whether it be an online school, whether it be a charter, whether it be a district school, whether it be a different school within your child's districts. Arizona is all about parent choice, and any and all of those options are available to you. And if at this point you're not sure what you're going to do, my recommendation is to pick up the phone and call us at Raising Special Kids, and we'll be happy to help you figure out what's going on in your situation and what you might need to do next. Thank you very much for your time. I'm now going to turn it over to Melissa.
Hi, I'm back. Thank you so much, ladies, for doing such a great job on that. We're going to take some time to answer some of the questions. Please type them in the chat window, and I will read them off in the order they're received. That's what I'm going to do, but I am going to address a couple of things that came up earlier here. I noticed that I'm following along with your questions as we have been talking. We're going to go back to the beginning here. Clayton Duffy had specifically asked a question about assistive technology, and can people use assistive technology with the ESA account, and how do they get that? Karla, I think that would be a great question for you to address.
Okay, thank you. So currently, assistive technology, as far as purchasing it, is not allowed. The statute prohibits it, and it's really hard as someone who is so actively involved with kiddos with disabilities, and knowing that the assistive technology array of things that you can purchase from sensory items to even iPads, and I think that that's where a lot of people get that confusion, is because iPads are definitely not allowed to be purchased. You know, the question becomes, what about the weighted vests? What about the weighted pencils? What about the weighted blankets or the swings? And currently the way the statute's written, they only allow for rentals of that equipment. You know, we have a task force meeting, and I'm bringing this to their attention by basically saying, are these things that we can work with? because I always look at it as a consumable item versus a single-use item. So when we look at consumable items, we're talking about things like iPads, which anyone in the household can use, not necessarily the child on the Empowerment Scholarship account. But when we're looking at something like a weighted vest, for example, obviously I know that mom is not going to put that weighted vest on. That's something that's going to be for the student that's on the Empowerment Scholarship account. So these are kind of the things that we want to bring back to our task force meetings to see if we can open up some of these supplemental materials, some of these assistive technologies, some of this curriculum that we're having so many issues. And I don't know when we kind of got off the system from the way it used to be back in 2016 to where it is today. So we're definitely trying to, help the families kind of understand and navigate through that. So currently assistive technology cannot be purchased. It can only be rented, if that helps.
Karla, thank you. Hopefully that does help. I know that there are a lot of parents that feel that we really need some other options with assistive tech. So I know that there was a bill that they had tried to pass this last session and it did not go through. So that is definitely an area that needs to be explored, it looks like. We have a lot of parents on here helping parents. We've got some really smart people on here today. I'm glad to see you all there. The next, we had a question. This would be you probably again, Karla. Liz Perez asked, can a parent receiving ESA funds receive transportation services from local school district to the private school placement? I know parents have answered this online, but for anybody who wasn't reading the chat, I'm going to have Karla answer that question.
So the answer is yes. They can use transportation if the public school is willing to transport them. You could either, not have to pay for it or have to pay for it. That is completely up to them. So you can use it. The big thing that we're looking at is that they're not enrolling the kids back into public school to collect additional monies for the child, because that's what we consider double dipping. Now the state is paying the public school to either transport or provide services. So it's really important that if they're going to register these kids back in school to do something like this, that they make sure that they're not going to receive the funds from us, because we're also going to pay the funds for the family. So that's where we see the double dipping going on at the same time.
Yeah, but let me just clarify, because I think what parents think, Karla, is that if it's the local school district places the child at a private school through an IEP process, then the school district provides transportation. But if a family has withdrawn their child from public school and they're accepting Empowerment Scholarship account money, do the parents themselves have to provide the transportation, or can the district still do that?
They do have to provide the transportation, but if the school agrees that, hey, we'll just transport this child from the goodness of their heart, they can do something like that.
Okay, but I think that makes sense. But it's probably safe to assume that if a parent is on an ESA and places their child in private school, they better just plan on the transportation themselves.
That is correct. So the school has no obligation to transport the child.
Okay, that makes sense then. All right, hang on, we're going to go down here, and if you'll be patient with me, please, I'm scrolling. We had some questions on the 100-day rule, specifically by Tammy, and is the 100-day rule that they have to attend public school for 100 days, and then there's also some questions in here about if somebody is in an online public charter, how the hours with that time. Can you address the 100-day rule, please?
So the 100-day rule is that the statute says that a child has to be enrolled in a public school for the first 100 days. So if we're looking at the first days, some parents are still on vacation and they may miss out on day 2 or even day 3. So if they've missed the first 10 days consecutively, that is okay. What we don't want them to do is if they miss day 11 of the first 100 days, then they have now made themselves not eligible for a scholarship. So if you start school on day 8 or day 9 or even day 10, you're eligible as long as within those same 100 days you have not missed 10 consecutive days. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Are there any other questions on that? Anybody online? Was that clarified for the people that asked it? I'm looking to see if there's any further typing. Okay.
Yeah, so basically we're looking at 10 consecutive days, whether they're at the beginning, in the middle of the year, or towards the end of the 100 days.
Okay. All right, we'll move on to the next one. This next question we're going to direct to Maya. Maya, this question is from Diana Hernandez, and she was asking, if a private school participates in the lunch program and receives federal funding for that lunch program, does the 504 and ADE rules apply to that private school?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I will say, it's a possibility. There is legal precedent kind of both ways on this issue. Some courts have found that participation in the national school lunch program is enough to be considered receipt of federal funding and for 504 to apply. Others have found that it is not. So I would just say, look at that specifically, maybe consult with an attorney specifically about the school you're looking at and what their level of receipt of federal funds through programs such as that might be. But yeah, it's kind of a split issue as far as I'm aware.
Okay. All right, thank you for that clarification. This next question I think would be for Kathy. It's a question from Joanne Roseno. Pardon me if I'm saying your name wrong. Joanne asks specifically about challenging the progress reports. So she said, can we challenge progress reports? And if we do, how do we get that data? How do we challenge?
So I'm assuming she's feeling that either the progress report says the student is making progress, but they're not, or vice versa. So absolutely, there should be a baseline on the goal in the IEP, and it should say right within the goal, as measured on teacher-created charts, or however it's measured, however that's listed in the goal. The parent could certainly ask to see those and say, you say that the child's at 50%, but I sure don't see that. Can we see what the teacher reports say, or whatever else? So they can ask to see any kind of data, especially the data that's being kept, to determine what kind of progress the child is making on the goal.
Okay, but they can clearly request to see the data. And how should they go about doing that? Should they ask in writing? What is the best way to be effective if you're looking for that?
Every time you ask in writing, then you have a record of it. It could start informally by just asking the teacher, but if the goal was written well, it will say right in the goal, as measured by, and however, it's teacher observation, it's data created charts, it's whatever. And I would go back and say, I don't see at home that my child is at 50% of this. Can I see whatever it is, the teacher created chart, to see why you think that he or she is doing this at 50% when I don't think they are? So absolutely ask for it. You can certainly do it in writing. It's really up to the relationship whether you want to do it verbally or in writing.
Very helpful. The next question is actually a question I think for Karla, Maya, and myself. And this specifically, Teresa Brooks submitted this question, or a statement really, and that is that her child in a private school was a victim of restraint and seclusion and has PTSD. And this is one of the reasons I really wanted to do this webinar as a council member. I've been approached by a lot of family members whose kids went into private schools and have been victims of abuse of restraint and seclusion. And the reality of this, I am going to address this because I did help pass this law. And unfortunately, we couldn't make it as tight as we need to. It needs to go back to the legislature. That law for restraint and seclusion does not apply to private schools. If your child is placed there by the IEP process and they're still a public school student, they still have some protections. However, if you have withdrawn them from the public school, and I'm going to preface this with, I went in and met with Alyssa Trollinger, the Director for Exceptional Student Services at the Department of Education, and she and I had a lengthy discussion on this. And I explained to her what I was dealing with a number of families that had called and asked for help. She explained to me that when you withdraw your child from public school and you sign that waiver and accept the ESA, you no longer have any of the rights under IDEA and FAPE, as this was explained earlier. But that also extends to the restraint and seclusion laws. You do not have a place to complain to. There is no reporting requirement for private schools that are servicing students under ESA or private funds. Department of Ed is not going to take your complaint. They don't have a mechanism to deal with it or address it. And that was made very clear, and that perhaps it is a legislative issue. I find this very troubling. We have seen the incidence of restraints and seclusions from reporting from families actually go up. sadly. Public schools, the numbers I think have actually gone down, but schools report more than they used to. But because there is no oversight in private schools, this is a huge issue. So Karla, if you have anything to add to this, or Maya, we'd love your feedback. We have just about 5 minutes left.
So Melissa, you are absolutely right. As you know, we've all stated, once you've exited the public school, you kind of lose, or you do lose, that right to FAPE. And Alyssa was correct in the information that she did provide about, you know, the restraint and seclusion, and there is no oversight for the private schools currently. You know, just like they could throw a child out, you know, they could cause this kind of harm to a child as well, and none of us would know unless the child comes home. And if he's not verbal, I mean, imagine how he's probably feeling not being able to express something like this. And so this is why we go back to making sure that you ask the right questions. You find out more information, talk to families who maybe have their kids in certain private schools, you know, and keep in mind that this can also happen with the tutor. You know, you may have left your child there to be tutored. You know, we need to find these out. We don't require fingerprint cards from them as far as, you know, submitting credentials, but this may be something that you want to ask. You know, it's so important that as parents we just ask the right questions. You know, I always say, think of this as if it was, you know, your own money coming out of your own pocket, where you want to make sure that you have your kid at the right place. But you're absolutely right. FAPE is no longer there for them once they exit the public school system.
It's not. And I think oftentimes, since we're talking about special education, families are under the impression that if the school has special education or autism in their name, people assume that there will be experts there, that people will be certified, they'll be the best of the best there. And there are no requirements to make sure that's the case. So I just encourage families to ask their questions about discipline policies in writing and curriculum as well. So moving on, thank you, Karla. We had a question. We have a few more minutes before we close up. Monica asked, and Karla, this would be for you again, once a person starts a private school and they no longer want to stay there, can they go back to public school?
Absolutely. So there is nothing that holds you back from returning to public school. The only thing that we do is you know, encourage you to contact us so that we could get through, you know, making sure that all your reports are audited and making sure that we close your account properly. But yes, whenever you want to go back to a public school, you just do that.
And then what would
make sure that you?
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What would the family do? What would be the process of that? What would they have to do?
So they would. So they would contact us here at ESA to let us know that they you know, they no longer wish to have the account, and we would send out the proper form to make sure that we get a good closure from the parent. And then at the same time, they would just simply go back into their district or their school of choice and have the child enrolled. You know, request an evaluation if you haven't had one done in a while if we're talking about a child with a disability, because the school also wants to know where the child stands currently before entering into the special education world.
Okay, that's very helpful. One more for you really quickly. And our parents online are answering a lot of these questions. That's why I haven't addressed every one of them. Somebody asked about a MET. If they need a MET, how do they get a MET report?
So if they're currently on the ESA program, or wanting to get on the ESA program, when we request an evaluation, the important thing to remember is who does the evaluation. So if we have a child that's attending a private school, it's the district that houses the private school that's responsible for evaluating the child. Now, if we have a child that is in a homeschool, who's being homeschooled or educated at home, and is attending a for-profit private school, then the school, the district of residency is responsible for that. And when we talk about nonprofit private schools and for-profit private schools, these are questions that you would have to ask your school, because I have no way of knowing unless I Google it and it's right there in my face to tell me if they're a non-for-profit or a profit school. So those are the parties that are responsible for the evaluations, and your child never loses the right to be evaluated. Can they decline an evaluation? Sure, and I put some of the reasons that an evaluation could be declined for a child on the slides.
Okay. Thank you. I know we're at time right now, but I've got one more question that came up with somebody really quickly. And the question was, can DDD, Division of Developmental Disabilities, if a child is getting services through the division, can they ask families to use their ESA funds for other therapies or services?
So they can, decide to what we say moonlight a provider with DDD to provide these services. The two don't mesh together, so they can still get their services through DD. If they want to hire a provider, to continue providing because they feel that this person that their child is working with is so amazing, they can do that with the ESA funds. They just have to make sure that we have the proper credentials for that individual to provide these services for the student.
Okay, which is terrific, but I think more specifically, DDD can't tell them that they must use their ESA funds for that.
No, not at all.
Okay.
No, and nor would we say you have to use DDD before you could tap into us for resources.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies. So thank you, Karla. Thank you for clarifying that. For those of you who didn't get your questions answered, 1 second, please feel free to follow up with us. And sorry about that, guys, distracted here with my stuff. You will be receiving an evaluation today on how we did in helping you get the information you needed on the ESAs. And I know maybe we didn't answer all your questions. Send them in. We have our contact information posted here that you may reach out to us. You'll be sending that a link to the evaluation. As I said, please, please, please fill that out. It lets us know what we need to do better and maybe differently because we're here to serve. We want to do the right thing and get the answers that you need. If you know anyone who should hear what we presented today, this webinar is recorded, and by the end of the week, it can be found on YouTube. You just need to search ADDPC, Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, and ESA. Thanks to all of our presenters today and all of you for your participation. Have a great day.